So good afternoon, everybody. This is our core yoga class. And today I want to talk to you about how your ribs relate to your pelvis. Now, when I did my first teacher training, it was a long time ago now, the teacher, she was really good at anatomy and mostly left me in the dust, but she would talk to me about mountain pose. And she brought me up as an example to all the other people, there was like 25 people in her class, about how my ribs don't line up over my pelvis. So here is like the midpoint of my pelvis, and you can see how my ribs kind of settle in front of the pelvis. I don't know if I can show that right or not, but this is a bit of an issue. What it does is it weakens my core. It affects my ability to be able to breathe freely with my diaphragm. It stretches and brings my hip flexors into a taut position, which gives my body stress response sort of messages. So you can see there's a lot going on there that I would like to be able to alleviate or change. So this kind of class is really helpful if you have that kind of posture. We see it a lot in yogis, believe it or not, because of the back bending that we've tried to bring ourselves into over the years. We'll talk more about what all of this means. But for now, in terms of props for today, I think you'll need a chair. If you don't have a chair handy, you can use some blocks or some books, but I'm going to start sitting on the chair so I can really get into kind of my body and feel it. We'll also be using tennis balls or massage balls again. We did a couple weeks ago. So if you don't have a tennis ball or massage ball, any kind of children's ball, you can just, you can use your hands for this massage, and I'll give you that option. We'll also be using a yoga strap, or you can use a scarf or a TheraBand if you don't have a yoga strap. I think that's all that we need for now. When you've got all organized, could you please come join me in a comfortable seat? And I've chosen to sit in a chair today. We'll be using it for some other poses as well, because I really want to get oriented into the pelvis. Now, one of the things, remember I mentioned that teacher, she was so smart about yoga. One of the things that I needed to hear back then and didn't was, don't worry, there won't necessarily, well, there was a test on all the anatomy stuff when you're going to be a yoga teacher, but for us today, there's no test. Just simply thinking about where I'm going to guide you is enough to jog your brain's natural intelligence. So you don't have to remember any of this stuff. You don't have to memorize it. You don't have to sort it out or try to figure it out. Just taking your brain to these places will remind your body if there's unnecessary tension somewhere, what to do about it, or if there's a compensatory pattern, how to eliminate it. So you don't have to know all that at the front of your mind. The back of the house is taking care of it. So that's why I want to get oriented into the pelvis. I want to let my sitting bones drill straight down towards the ground. I want to feel the bones of my hips heavy towards the chair. And I want to elongate the spine in a comfortable, easeful way. So there's not a lot of tension in holding my body upright. And then please draw awareness from the hip crests here up to the ribs, and see if you can kind of notice the side waist in your body. As you notice the side waist, you might also become aware of the lower ribs. And see if you can sense the diaphragm expanding and opening on the inhales, and things gathering in a little bit on the exhales. You don't have to take any dramatic breaths, but I just want to orient to breathing and to this area of the body, because this is what we're going to really talk about in core yoga today. Just maybe 2 more breaths. You can close your eyes if you like, just really settling in so that you're very attuned to your own experience. You have full attention on yourself for a change. Now, can I invite you to take your hands together in prayer pose? Place the fingers so that they just brush the bottom of your chin, and the heels of your palms are arranged in front of your breastbone. Let your shoulders relax and elbows drop, something like this. We're going to take an easy twist to the right. So just slowly twist. Now keep the chin aligned above the fingertips. Come back to center. And then take an easy twist to the left. Now take time with this movement. You don't need to go with the breath. You don't need to force. But what we want to do is we want to try to find an easeful rotation of the rib cage to one direction and then the other. Notice if there's any tensing at the fronts of your hip creases. You feel that on one or both sides. Or is there any other part of your body that's getting frustrated or tense or resistant? Because we often do twists in yoga, but we often use other body parts so that we can look really far over that shoulder and we think we're really twisting deeply. This is kind of taking the movement really into a basic kind of micro movement. Can be a little humbling, you know what I mean? Let's go to each side one more time. You can move as slowly as you like as you try to figure out what you feel. Noticing any resistance, any pulling, any tension. Now I've gone equally to both sides. So I'm going to come back to center and just take that seat again. Take a breath in and out. Notice if you have any different relationship to your side waist or if your breathing feels any different. And then let's come up to standing, to mountain pose. Keep your chair handy. We'll use it in just a second. As you come up to mountain pose, I want to become aware of the four corners of the feet. You hear that expression in yoga quite a bit, but what we're talking about is across the ball of the foot, so the hallux joint, and then over at the baby toe side, and then all the cup of your heel, so the right and left sides of your heel. And all four corners are felt hopefully simultaneously with equal weight to the ground. And that's on your right and your left foot. So there's a lot to think about when you think about the contact your feet are making with the ground. When we're in standing poses, and when you go through life, walking, hiking, climbing stairs, whatever, it's your foot's relationship with the ground that will talk to this up here. So that's why we're taking some time to explore it. Notice if there's any tension in holding mountain pose today, if you feel like you're bracing in any way. Be aware of the side waist, and then take a couple breaths, being aware of the movement of the diaphragm. We're going to come into just a mini chair pose. Now, here's a little buzzword that we can use today. The slower you go, the faster the gains. I like that. The slower you go, the faster your brain will learn and will change your movement pattern so you can be stronger, more efficient, less pain. So I turn sideways, but you're fine. From your mountain pose, just go into a baby chair pose and then come back out and then come back in. Just do that a couple times. These are baby chair poses, but I want to watch for a couple different things here. Notice the tendency to turn up the tailbone quite a bit, to go into a real kind of anterior tilt with the pelvis. So notice that if that's happening. And is there a way for you to do this movement so that doesn't happen quite so much? Maybe it's a smaller chair pose. The other thing I really want to watch is the fronts of the ribs. In order to keep the chest up, which is often cued in yoga, are you flaring out or lifting the fronts of the ribs? And then let's leave that for a little bit. We're going to come and play with some other elements and come back to that and see if anything's changed. Chair pose is generally not people's favorite pose for a number of reasons, but a lot of times it bothers their low back, or they feel their restrictions in hip or knee or even ankle joints. So we're going to start with the feet and work a little bit on building a bit more ankle flexibility. So if you have a tennis ball, let's grab a hold of it. You can use a yoga massage ball, a foam roller. You can use a rolled up with an elastic on it, washcloth, anything that's going to give some unusual feedback to the sole of your foot. If you don't have any of those props, you can sit back in your chair and just massage your foot in a way that feels useful to you in this moment. So there's no particular thing that I'm suggesting you do massaging your foot over the tennis ball. Just try to get all the surfaces of the sole of the foot from each of the tips of the toes out to the heel. You can press the ball into the ball of the foot and wiggle the toes a few times. That's interesting to loosen up the metatarsals. Then you can let the ball stay under the ball of the foot, bring the heel to the ground, and then roll the ball from side to side over the ball of the foot. So just get creative. There's no specifics here. You want to provide some unusual stimulation to the sole of your foot. And then let's let that go. Come back to stand in mountain pose. Are you more aware of the four corners of the foot on the foot you've been massaging? Is there any other sensations or feelings that you want to take time to acknowledge? And then we'll do the other foot too. And you will notice, I think, probably that there are some unusual sensations when you do this kind of work. The bottoms of your feet are very sensitive. There's a lot of connective tissue, and there are a lot of joints in your feet. We don't think about how complicated the foot is. And we tend to abuse our feet terribly, putting them in high heels and super structured boots where they can't breathe and move around. Yeah. So I'm just kind of playing around here, creating unusual and interesting sensations. Okay. Come back to mountain pose for a breath or two. Maybe there is something else that's percolating up to your brain. Then I'm going to use the massage ball or the tennis ball to do my gluteus muscles. Now, if you don't have a massage ball or even a children's vinyl ball, you can, again, use your hands to massage. Now, I find this easy to do at the wall. So I'm going to place the ball in the fleshy part of my buttocks, keep the knees and ankles slightly bent, and then you push into the ball to the degree that you want to. Some days this goes really well, and other days it's like, holy cramoly, Batman, where did that come from? So if you're moving around, you want to stick to the fleshy parts of your buttocks. If you're moving around and you find a really tender area, you might stay there and try to breathe with the sensations and know that it's really good that you discovered that spot, that you're acknowledging that spot, because there's a communication that's flowing between that spot in your brain. And your brain's smart. It's going to figure it out. It's going to say, oh, you don't want us to do that movement pattern because it creates that tender spot in the gluteus muscles. Okay, we won't do that movement pattern then. So you don't have to direct that conversation. Your body's really smart and knows how to have that conversation on its own. Okay, I hope you've had enough time to explore that first buttock. We'll move to the second one. You can also do this laying on the ground with your knees bent, feet on the floor, but then your full body weight is on the ball. This way against the wall, you can kind of control the amount of pressure. And it's very interesting for me. Usually when I do this side is the sorest side, but today I discovered that the other side had more of those little trigger points, those little exciting bits. There we go. So if you find a really tender spot, you can stop for a second. You can ease off on the pressure until it's just sensation, not pain. Take a couple breaths, see if it eases. Try to be a little bit curious, exploratory. Good. All right. And then we can leave the massage balls now. They've done their job for us. We'll come back to mountain pose. Notice the connection of your feet to the ground again. Can you find all four corners of your right and your left foot? Do you have any more sense of aliveness in your legs? How the feet are directly communicating up into the buttocks muscles. This is a really important kinetic chain, really important energetic connection, and it can be quite dead. I think because we sit so much in our culture, the gluteus muscles just aren't as alive as they used to be in more primitive cultures. So we really need to bring that back into focus. Now try your mini chair pose. Try your mini chair pose. Remember, the slower you go, the faster you gain. This isn't a deep chair, but notice your tendency to maybe stick the butt out. Can you find a little easefulness there now? And notice if you had that tendency to really, lift and stick the ribs out, can you keep the fronts of the ribs quiet as you come into your chair pose? Good. And then we'll let that go. We're going to use our strap for the next little bit of work. So you can use a scarf or an old belt as well. A scarf would probably be better rather than an old belt, but you know, anything can kind of do. So just have that handy. Let's just roll our shoulders back a few times. Notice when you're doing this movement, what's happening in your rib cage and your side waist. So don't worry so much about your shoulders. Keep your attention on the feature area today, which is your rib cage and your waist. Okay. And then we'll move a little bit with the breath. So take the scarf or the tie in your hands. We're going to lift up on the inhale, lower on the exhale, but watch the fronts of your ribs. So go slowly. Keep the fronts of your ribs quiet if you can. Just soften and relax. It's not a forcing, it's not a bracing, it's a releasing of some effort. Now, if your arms don't go up all the way, that's okay. That's really not what we're worried about today. We're worried about the rib cage today. On the inhales in particular, can you feel the side ribs inflating? So a lateral expansion of the rib cage. And then what about the back of the ribs? Sometimes that's a really difficult area to sense anything into. The sensation from the back body is just not as readily accessible. Let's take one more breath here. And then release the strap. Good work. Sideways on your mat. Open your legs, turn your toes out at an angle, and be prepared to squat in Devyasana. You can just keep your hands on your hips for this first round. We're going to do a few rounds of Devyasana. I want to bring your awareness to the hip creases here, the hip sockets. So just notice what it feels like to bend here. Just see if you can feel what happens when you bend here. What's going on in your feet as you do this? Do you lose the four corners of your feet? Remember, moving slowly brings us faster gains. So you don't necessarily have to do this with the breath. You can take more time and just really figure out what's going on here. Good. One more time. Okay. And then you can bring your feet back together for mountain pose. Trying to keep awareness on the four corners of the feet. And here's where I'm going to use my chair again. Now you may find lifting your leg up the way I'm going to is too high. So you could have a stack of books or a stack of blocks or any other firm surface. If, you know, I have those folding stools in my kitchen because I can't get anything in the cupboard. You can use one of those little folding stools or step stools. So facing your chair from mountain pose, let's lift one foot up onto the chair seat. You want the knee over top of the ankle if possible. So you can have your foot on something lower if this is too much for your leg, for your hip joint. Keep your body square for the moment towards the back of the chair. Feel the four corners of each of your feet. Now bring your hands into prayer again, aligning the fingertips with the chin, just like we did earlier. And we'll twist towards your bent knee. So inhale and slowly twist on the exhale. Notice if you have a little bit more range of motion than you did when you first did this, when you were seated in the chair. See if you can notice this hip socket of the lifted leg. Does it stay soft? Does the crease stay quiet? Do you notice anything else in your body as you do this movement? What are the ribs doing? Are they staying soft and responsive to the breath? How about your shoulders? Do you feel your shoulders trying to tense or take any of this work? Take one more breath to the side. And then step back into mountain pose. Using mountain pose as a reference pose so you can assess and let your body, you know, absorb the benefits or the changes. For me, the lifted leg side this hip feels very soft and open in comparison to the other side. So if you would like to lift your other leg up onto your blocks or chair, take a breath just to make sure things are staying soft, that you're still grounded into both feet. Hands in chair with the fingertips brushing your chin. Relax the shoulders, keep the elbows heavy. Inhale tall, and then exhale, twist. Now, do you feel restricted to this side as compared to the other side? Or is it more mobile? Or can you tell? Is anything else coming up? Do you notice tension in the standing leg or the standing buttock? How about your jaw? What's your facial expression like? So all of these aspects of your experience are really interesting for your brain to know about. So as you kind of alight like a butterfly on all these different sensations, your brain registers them and makes use of that information. Let's take one more breath. And then come back to center, release back to mountain pose. And notice what you feel, especially those four corners of the feet. So now we're going to use the yoga strap or the scarf. You can also use a TheraBand. We're going to bring it around the chest, right at the bottom rib here, and then make it fairly snug. So if you're tying a scarf, make it fairly snug. The yoga strap can be adjusted like this. Find your mountain pose. What draws your attention now? What does it feel like to breathe with the strap around the lower ribs? Can you feel your side ribs flaring laterally as you breathe in? Can you feel the back of your ribs moving at all as you breathe? And then what else do you feel moving in your body as you breathe? And you might think, why is our yoga teacher so obsessed with what's going on with breathing? Breathing is the foundation of everything. Breathing is life. When we're restricted in our breathing, we're restricted in our movement, but also our thinking and our feeling and our joy. So the movement of breath is exaggerated maybe by the strap. The sensations are exaggerated here, but you may feel breathing happening in other places. How about your pelvic floor? Pelvic floor dysfunction is a huge issue in our world. And if you go to see a specialist, they're going to talk to you about breathing. Okay, see if you can keep a little bit of awareness to what we were just doing. Keep your strap in place, turn sideways on your mat. We're going to go back to our goddess pose. So turn your toes out. Take a couple breaths the way you did last time. And instead of so much concentration here in the hip joints, have a little bit more awareness in the ribs. And notice if you're feeling any change of tension anywhere, front, sides, or back, as you come into the squat. Okay. And then next time we do this, we're going to come down and hold the squat. Check out the four corners of the feet. Distribute the weight evenly, right and left. Then take your hands and bring them to the outer sides of your thighs. Gently press your hands back into your legs and open your legs out into your hands. So you actually didn't change shape. You're still in the same goddess pose, but you probably noticed a couple things kicking in. What do you feel? Anytime you need to release, take a break, shake things out, and then come back. Your palms are behind your thighs, your outer thighs pushing into your palms stabilizing from behind. And then notice, you probably notice stuff in your legs. Probably notice stuff in your buttocks, but do you notice anything in your ribs or your shoulders or your jaw? How about your feet? All four corners of the feet still equally grounded. So come in and out a couple times. Give yourself a chance to have a good, thorough chat with your body about what goes on here. Try it one more time. Really digging deep here in the core yoga class today. Good. Okay, then release, shake out your arms, shake out your legs. We're going to try our chair pose with the strap around the ribs. So when you're ready, Utkatasana. Notice if you have a tendency to have the ribs flared, how the strap's going to give you that feedback. Let's try it a couple times. The slower you go, the faster your gains. Okay. Notice if there's any more easefulness with the movement into chair. If it normally does bother your low back or you don't feel like you can stand upright, you have to do this to get into chair. Is that easier to just have a natural spine? So just working with that, one more breath. Now you may want your chair in front of you for a little bit of balance, to help you with balance. You don't have to have it there, but you can. We're going to keep the strap around the ribs. And we're going to take one leg, and choose whatever leg you want to start with. And then hands on the hips to keep your pelvis square to the chair. And then take your leg back. And notice how far you can bring your leg back with your bumper bones pointing straight ahead. This is your natural range of motion in hip extension. So notice I'm not turning to the side or I'm not lifting my body. I'm just moving the leg back. So try that a couple times. Remember, the slower you go, the faster your gains. And then come to stand back in mountain pose on 2 feet. There should be very little change in the upper body. Watch the strap. It's going to tell you if you're doing a big rib flare. Try the other leg now. Is it different on this side? Do you have greater or less range of motion on this side? And, you know, I have that natural tendency to let the ribs really pop open, and I can feel that when I take the leg back. It's trying to do it. I'm going to keep the strap fairly tight to remind me I don't need to do that pattern. I can use my gluteus muscles to lift the leg back. Okay, break in mountain pose, Tadasana. This is our reference pose. Hopefully you're feeling some feedback from the back muscles of your legs and buttocks. That's good. We're building strength there. That really contributes to core. We're going to come into a high lunge. And again, you may want your chair to help you with balance here, so you don't have to worry about that part of things. Take that first leg, take it into hip extension. You already did that. And then bend into the front knee and step the leg as far back as you can to find your high lunge. And then we'll come out of that and come back into it. So slowly moving into lunge pose. Now you'll notice that your natural range of motion was only that, whatever yours was, that's mine. In order to get the leg further back than here, I have to tip the pelvis. I have to let the pelvis come into an anterior tilt. So I want to go slowly with that movement a few times, asking myself, where can I find the easiest way to do this? To let the pelvis tip forward a little bit. And I want to find an easefulness, a comfort. As you come into the lunge pose, notice if you feel pressure at the front of your strap. That means your ribs are trying to pop out. Can you keep that quiet while you come into lunge? Good. And then from here, if you lift your arms, remember we did this with the strap earlier. If you lift your arms like this or cactus arms, can you keep the fronts of your ribs quiet? So you're in your high lunge pose. Take one more breath. And then move back to mountain pose. So the question is, do you have the courage to work within your natural range of motion? This is a really fundamental question in yoga. Yoga is supposed to be about bringing everything together, union. We're supposed to be learning to live with our egos. If you're pushing yourself continually in your postures outside your natural range of motion, that's ego driving your practice. It's not yoga anymore. It's something else. So find the other leg now. Go into your natural hip extension, then step back and try that movement a few times. Going as slowly as you can, so you can take several breaths, feeling the pelvis tip forward, but the ribs not blossoming out, keeping the fronts of the ribs quiet. See if you can find an easefulness to this movement. This is something we normally just do like on an inhale, for example, and it's over and done with. We don't have time to really focus on it. So today we're looking at that relationship between the ribs and the pelvis, and this is a key movement we do over and over again. You do this movement when you go walking and climb stairs. Then if you can find your high lunge and find the balance, you can practice lifting the arms, noticing if there's a lot of extra pressure at the front of the strap or scarf, you know your rib flaring. So come back down and try to remember how you did this from Tadasana without flaring the fronts of the ribs. Take a breath. And then let's come back into mountain pose. Okay. Again, you may need the chair beside you, the back of the chair to hang on to. We're going to work in tree pose a little bit, and I really don't want you to be too distracted by trying to find your balance. If it's a bit elusive today, that can be a different class another time. So this is what I call opening the cupboard door version of tree pose. So if you can, have your hands on your hips, on the hip crests here. Keep the strap here so you've got immediate feedback if you start to get funky around the ribs. Come up onto the the big toe of one foot. Immediately notice what kind of things have to happen to your body. If there's a lot of twisting and turning to come up onto that big toe, be aware of that and see if you can do this movement without too much compensation through the rest of the body. Keep both sides of your waist equally long. Now, once you get that, again, we're breaking this down into micro movements, I know, but this is how our brain learns. Once you get this, open the cupboard door and then close the cupboard door. Again, moving as slowly as you can. And I call this opening the cupboard door because it's like in your kitchen, when you open the door of the cupboard, the whole kitchen doesn't twist and bend. You're on a hinge. So the hip is our hinge here. And that's the only thing we're really asking for movement in. Good. And after you feel like there's some easefulness, some familiarity with that movement, come back to the reference pose, which is Tadasana today. Sweeping quickly through the four corners of the feet, sensations in the hip joints, pelvic floor, sides of waist, ribs. So just kind of touching base with those areas of interest, and we'll try the other side. So opening and closing the kitchen cupboard. And this can be really interesting. All those different little compensations that you've gotten used to over the years when you come into tree pose and you're like, oh, I was giving my core some erroneous messages in order to get to a really sexy tree pose, or I was so focused on being able to balance on one leg, I didn't remember how to use the hip properly. And hopefully that gives you a little reminder. Okay, so if you can hang on to the back of the chair, turn the chair around so the seat of the chair is here. If you find it's too hard to get your foot up onto the chair, maybe that was before too, you can use the same blocks or footstool, books, that sort of thing. So here's something that happens sometimes when this movement happens. So let me just show you what I mean. Sometimes people want to lift their foot up onto the chair And notice that there's a real tilting of the pelvis here. There's also a sense of collapse on this one side of the waist. And then the teacher says, bring your pelvis even, and then someone makes a correction. We want to try to be able to do that movement without having to correct after. So you're asking to be how much courage you have to find your natural range of motion. So from here, you're going to lift your foot right up, turn the foot out, and place the foot on the chair, hopefully keeping your pelvis fairly level, and an easefulness and openness in both sides of your trunk. Now, I'm pretty short, so in order to get my foot this high, I do have to do a little compensating. I finally ordered another block, so I'm going to have 2 cork blocks in the studio. Finally, I don't know why it took me so long. But really, for me on this pose, I should probably have my foot on blocks or a footstool. So see if you can find some easefulness, some equal length in both sides of your torso here. And then we'll bring our hands back into that prayer-like position that we've been using. So the fingertips just brushing your chin. Look back down to the 4 corners of your foot, even the foot that's up on the chair. We're going to twist towards that knee. So when you're ready, exhale, come into the twist, and inhale, come back to center. Do you notice any more liquidity as you twist your rib cage on the foundation of the pelvis? By lifting the leg like this, you kind of fixed the pelvis the way that your legs are. So you're looking for a little bit more rotation in the spine. Again, watch the shoulders. Watch the fronts of the ribs flaring or bracing. Try to keep a softness in the front of your hip crease of this lifted leg. Good. And then let's release back into our mountain pose. When you lower your foot, you shouldn't feel as though there's a lot of big change in the pelvis. Your pelvis should have been kind of almost in that place, even though you have the leg lifted. Now moving to the second side, it's going to feel quite a bit different, I think. So we'll be ready for that. Remember, when we come into the movement, we're going to lift that knee and take it out to the side, hopefully keeping our pelvis fairly quiet and square towards the front of the room. Good. Pressing into the 4 corners of both of your feet. Noticing if there's any bracing, any compression at the front of the hip. You might need to come in and out of the pose a few times to figure out how to do that movement without the compensatory patterns. Hands together at the heart with the fingertips brushing the chin. Inhale tall and exhale, twist towards the bent knee. Does it feel like you have more movement on this side or less? Or can you tell the difference? Can you move a little bit more slowly so there's more time for your brain to process the full story? Take 2 more breaths. And then releasing back into mountain pose, using Tadasana as your reference pose. Okay. Feel free to have your chair like this in front of you if you feel you need to have a little bit of extra support and balance. Mountain pose facing the front of your mat. You're going to step back one leg into high lunge. So try to remember our practice of doing this before, where we found our natural range of motion, taking the leg back, and then letting the hips tip forward a little bit to find the full lunge pose. There we go. So just kind of reminding yourself of the easeful way to get into high lunge. Now remember how to lift your arms without flaring out the front ribs. You've still got the scarf here that'll give you that little bit of feedback. And this is going to happen on our inhales. On our exhales, we're going to come into warrior 2. So pivoting on the back foot, opening the pelvis to the side of the mat, and opening the arms out from the shoulders. So that's happening on the exhale. Now see if we can come back into our high lunge facing the front of the mat. keeping an easeful movement. So inhale, pivot back up, watch those ribs flaring, and then exhale into your warrior two. Watch for areas of bracing or discomfort. Trying to keep the ribs over the pelvis. So often in warrior two, the rib cage shifts towards the bent knee. We're trying to keep the crown of the head centered over the pelvic floor between these two postures. It's almost like there's a rod up from the floor, like a carousel horse has, and you're rotating on that vertical pole. Let's release back to mountain pose. Use that as your reference pose. Notice the four corners of the feet. Notice your ribs. Notice the length in your side waist. Let's do that on the other side. So you're looking for your natural range of motion as you extend the hip. Then let yourself tip forward a little bit as you come into lunge. As you lift your arms, be aware of the fronts of the ribs. Take an inhale here. And as you exhale, rotate open to the side in warrior two. Notice any bracing in the shoulders or the upper back. Try to keep the jaw relaxed. Even though these are two really powerful poses, we're using all the major muscle movers of the body. See if you can keep that vertical alignment between pelvic floor and crown of head, like there's a carousel horse pole up through your center, and you're moving around that axis. Take one more breath here. And then release. We're going to stay facing the side of the mat. Feet can come even a little wider apart if you want to. Then let's externally rotate the right leg. Bring your hands so that your thumbs are right underneath your strap and your fingers are pushing down on that big hip bones, those big side bones. So pushing down on your hip crest. And you're trying to make that space bigger, trying to lengthen your side waist. Watch the fronts of your ribs don't flare out. Take an inhale. And as you exhale, tip towards the right as though you're going to come into triangle pose. But if you feel this underside hand crunching, come back up, open the right side of your body, and then angle out to the right, keeping the length on the right side of the body. Move slowly to get faster gains. Wow, what a difference from the way I normally come into Trikonasana. Once you've found your angle this way, so that your underside waist is just as long as your top waist, now you can release your bottom arm and lift your top arm if you want to. Your top arm could also rest at your hip. This is our Trikonasana for today. Feel the scarf around your ribs and fill the side waist, especially on the bottom side, and fill the back of your scarf or your yoga strap. Feel the four corners of both of your feet. Now there's a dynamic triangle pose. Let's come back up, bring our feet into a parallel position, take a moment to process what's just happened. So often we try to get our hand down to a block or something, and we have all kinds of, stuff we've built into the core so we can achieve that shape. But is that really your natural range of motion? Do you have the courage to express your body as it is beautiful right now? Externally rotating the left leg, lengthening the side waist. So I'm using my fingers to keep that long, and then coming into that angle off to the side. I want to make sure there's a little softness in the left knee, so there's room for this. Yep. And how can you really bring that line from the pelvic floor to the crown? Keep it really long as you angle to the side. And then once you found that, then you could let your left hand come down, right arm straight back up. This isn't as deep a triangle pose as maybe you're used to getting into, but look at the scarf around your ribs. Look at the easefulness, the ability we have to connect with all four corners of both feet, the expression on the face. Take one more breath. And then let's release. Bring your feet together. Last chair pose. This time, we might lift the arms the way we often do in chair, and we might use the ankle and knee joints a little bit more than we're used to, because everything's really lubricated and warmed up. So start to bend the knees. Keep your tailbone quiet. Keep your low back open. Don't go into back extension. Watch and notice if the fronts of your ribs start to flare out. And come into the deepest squat you can by keeping the back long and the fronts of the ribs soft. And that's as deep as I can really go and maintain an upright body. And then from there, as you lift your arms up alongside your ears, watch any additional pressure at the front of your rib cage. Soften. Let the fronts of your ribs be quiet. Breathe into the side ribs. Breathe into the back ribs. This is our Utkatasana for today. One last breath. And then releasing. Whew. Let's get rid of the strap. And then let's get ready to come down for Shavasana. We're going to have a little bit of a longer Shavasana than sometimes we take in these classes, because we worked really hard today to break down movements in common postures. And we need that additional time for the information to truly percolate all through the brain. So come to lie down. If there's any closing stretches you're really craving, by all means. But if it's your habit to do a certain stretch, maybe don't do a habitual stretch. Just ask yourself if there's really something you need to move. But if there's not, then don't. Just come right down to the floor. And if you need to have a small pillow or something under the backs of your knees, then you need it. That's okay. But again, if it's just habitual to do this or that, what if you let your body align as closely to the earth as possible? So settle back into a still position as best as you can. You can close your eyes if that helps you to focus inward. And logically remind your body and mind that this is an important part of the process. This is when all of the sensory data that you've collected during our active practice will be filed away. It could get discarded, it could get lost. So we're taking a little bit of extra time in Shavasana today so that your brain has more time to process this information properly. The job that we have to allow this process to unfold is to just stay still and quiet and as relaxed as possible. It sounds really simple, but it's super hard, I think. So let's start by taking a couple deeper breaths. You don't have that strap around your ribs anymore, but you may still feel the echo of it. There still may be some unusual sensation in those ribs. So take a deeper breath or two. You can even sigh it out to help you relax. With each exhale, feel your bones settling a little bit more deeply toward the ground. To even more deeply facilitate your learning, maybe we can mentally visit with some of the spots we talked about and we moved and we massaged in today's class. So could I please invite you to take your awareness down to your feet? Feel across the ball of your foot, particularly the big toe joint, and over to the baby toe side of the foot. See if you can feel your heels resting on the ground and be aware of the whole perimeter of your heel. Do you remember what it was like to stand on your feet and feel the pressure of the ground on those points? Are there any sensations in the soles of your feet now? After you've had a chance to process that, maybe moving your awareness up to the buttocks muscles. Noticing the pressure of your buttocks muscles as they spread into the ground. Do you recall the sensation of the massage? If you use a tennis ball or your hands, can you remember any of the sore points if you found any? Do you still feel them? What else do you feel? And then bringing your awareness to the fronts of your hips, where your hips crease at the groins. You can even take your fingers and gently probe that place if you want to, the fronts of your hips and your groins. Does that area of your body feel soft right now? Or does it feel a bit resistant, more than spongy, taut? Can you feel one side of your hips more than the other? Are there any other sensations? And then from this area, moving up your side waist on the right and left side. So you're aware of the side body between the hip crest and the bottom rib. Lying here on the floor, do you sense one of these spaces is shorter than the other, or do they feel the same? Is there any holding or tension? How about the fronts of your ribs? We talked a lot about that today. Does that area feel soft from your perspective? Does it feel like your front ribs, those bones are heavy and sinking to the ground? Or is there rigidity there? Can you sense the ribs floating? We're supposed to have floating ribs. Can you sense the ribs floating? Can you feel your diaphragm? Sometimes the lateral flare of the ribs as you breathe in, or sometimes it's a slight increase in pressure between your back and the floor as you breathe in. That's evidence that your diaphragm is working. How easily have your shoulders settled to the ground? Are you gripping with your hands in any way? Are there any other sensations through the chest, shoulders, or arms that are making their way to your attention? And then be aware of the expression on your face. If you were to look in the mirror right now, or I could take a snapshot of you, would your face be concentrating really hard? Would it be sleeping? Or somewhere in between? Would there be frustration? Would there be wonder? Would there be softness? So be aware that all these movement patterns that we've been teasing apart today, they show up on your face. They tell the world how you're feeling. And then bringing the same sort of question or curiosity to the mind, to the thoughts. Noticing what's running through your mind right now. Are you really involved in sorting something out or telling a story? Is there a particularly strong emotion or feeling? Would you have the courage to let that go for the moment so that your brain can have more attention on processing the movement stuff we've been doing? So it's a conscious choice you could make to devote more resources to reorganizing your movement patterns and pick up those other thoughts at another time. And for the next few breaths, I'll be quiet and allow you to have your own personal experience just as it is. If you would like to take a little bit more time to, let this filing process continue, it's well worth it. But if you feel you have had adequate space for that, slowly reanimate your body, and I'll meet you in any kind of comfortable seat. You can return to your chair if you like. And let's close our class by sharing the sacred sound of Om. It'll help all that filing settle in a more harmonious way, I think. I'm inhaling now. Om. Namaste. If you would like to unmute, I'm going to stop the recording.